Oh, okay, great. Okay, okay. Welcome everybody. Sorry for a little bit of technical challenges. So first, I just want to welcome you to our webinar, Ukrainian Voices on the War in Ukraine. It's really important among all the commentary and the media attention to have people from Ukraine, Ukrainian voices as part of this dialogue. And I just want to thank Marika Olahar, Valeria Umanets, and Evgenia Mitrokhina, 3 graduate students in the political science department, for setting this up and making this possible. So my name is Yoshiko Herrera, and I'm a professor in the political science department here at UW-Madison. We are going to have 3 speakers from Ukraine joining us by Zoom, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. And I want to encourage everybody that's joining us online, if you can, to put your questions in the chat, and we'll monitor the chat and try to bring those questions to the speakers after they're done with their remarks. And people in the room, we're actually going to ask you, if you want to pose a question, to come up here to the microphone so that everybody online will be able to hear it. Okay, so without further ado, let me introduce our first speaker, who is Roman Hromik, human rights activist currently in Lvov region. And I believe he's, I'm looking at the different screens, excuse me. He is on, we're going to put him on, as soon as I'm stopped talking, he will become on speaker mode, and he'll be the first of our 3 speakers. Okay, so let's turn it over to Roman.
Good time of the day, everyone. Thank you, Professor, for introducing me, and it's an honor to be speaking to you today. I will begin immediately by explaining the background. You can see behind me, I'm in my car, and the reason why I'm here is not because I lack the respect for the institution that is listening to me and hosting this event, but rather it's a tiny illustration of what things are looking like in Ukraine these days. The reason I'm here in my car right now, because I've spent the last day and a half driving around this region for hundreds of miles, searching for a bulletproof vest and helmet for my relative who has volunteered to the armed forces of Ukraine. He's supposed to be leaving for the east to be at the front line tomorrow. So I really had very little time to find a vest and a helmet for him. This also illustrates one of the problems we are having. The armed forces of Ukraine are not ready to equip the newly recruited military servicemen with basic things such as a helmet and a vest. So that explains the background behind me. I will also start my short presentation with you by sharing some of my personal experiences. A disclaimer in the beginning of my short talk: my experience, my personal experience of this last 12 days is by far much more fortunate compared to that of most of Ukrainians, compared to that of millions of Ukrainians whose experience of this last 2 weeks has been really horrific. My story is by far not as bad, but it still is an illustration of how this can be perceived by people here, but also it can also describe the kind of challenges and the kind of needs that the country currently is having. And that's why I think this sharing of my experience can be helpful for the discussion that will follow. When the events escalated on February 24th, I was actually in Washington, D.C. I was on my vacation from my job at the British Embassy in Kyiv. I was part of the Open World program organized by the Congress, US Congress, and I was supposed to be staying there until March 6th, I believe. Technically, when the first artillery rockets hit Kyiv and other cities, it was around 11 p.m., I think, in Washington. So I was really ready to go to bed in my hotel room. Before I even learned about what is happening in the country, And by the way, I happen to be a Kyiv resident, so my city was hit by the rockets in the very first hours of the attack. The first thing I was able to sense, I heard loud screaming of somebody somewhere in the neighboring room in the hotel. I wasn't sure whether it were below me or above me. A lady was screaming in a really horrific manner in Russian, I believe. And I realized it's probably one of the people who were traveling with me in the bigger group from Ukraine. Uh, my first immediate idea was maybe there's some kind of a domestic violence episode happening. But then I realized it's a phone conversation because I couldn't hear the other person responding. The lady kept on screaming. And then just by accident, I opened my phone and I realized that Ukraine has been attacked. A lot of rockets have been, ballistic missile rockets have been hitting a number of places, including Kiev. My assumption is that lady was talking to someone who was immediately nearby one of the places where the first hits struck. Next morning, I was already changing my tickets and I was doing my best to come back home as soon as possible because my entire family was here. Part of my family was deep into the east of Ukraine, so I was really scared that I would be caught somewhere safe in the west in a hotel room, having zero control over what happens to the people I care about in Ukraine. This is exactly why I had to interrupt my visit to the States and come back. Um, Without going into too much detail, there's one episode of my trip back to Ukraine, which was taking place on the second and third day after this escalation happened, which I think is worth describing to you. There was only one way of getting back to Ukraine quickly or relatively quickly, which was to cross the Poland-Ukraine border by foot. There was a pedestrian crossing. There was no flights, obviously, immediately after the first missiles were launched from Russia and Belarus territory. So going by car would be too long of a trip because of the lines. So I went on by foot. The pedestrian crossing, the way it works, you're walking into the country, and you can also see people walking out of the country. So I was able to observe the crowd, if that's the correct word for it, of people, mainly women and elderly and little kids, including newborns, trying to cross by foot from Ukraine to Poland, fleeing from the horrors of the war. It was really it's a kind of experience difficult to describe with words. I haven't seen anything like that. I have seen maybe similar things on TV from Middle East, maybe. Um, you can imagine freezing temperatures, a lot of snow lying around. It was still winter, and people crowding up to the border not being, the border service people not being able to process them quickly enough, and so they end up spending their hours standing or sitting on the ground. I even saw toddlers sleeping on some kind of blankets right on the snow, covered with another blanket. So the kind of things you will never expect to see, even in a country where the war has been taking place in some kind of way since 2014. So this will also lead to my other part of my speech, where I will talk about the needs of the country, because the problems that could have seen at the border are still there. I had another chance to see the border situation just yesterday, 2 days ago, actually. Pardon. But now I will talk about what's new about this escalation. As you all know, I'm sure, the war with Russia has been taking place since 2014. It was probably divided, we can say divided into two parts. There was the occupation of Crimea, and then life in Crimea changed drastically. There were a lot of systemic violations of human rights, including arrests of dissidents, of people who did not accept the occupation. There were kidnappings, occasional killings, but there was no open warfare between Ukraine and Russia over Crimea. And there was also the part in the east of Ukraine, which you also are aware of, where shelling has been taking place all of the time. There were escalations and there were calmer days, but in general, it has been going on for 8 years now. I was there at close enough at the front line in the east of Ukraine twice, in 2015 and 2016. Each time I was traveling with a group of parliamentarians from Kiev. So as you can imagine, it was quite a safe experience. I didn't have to worry about my personal safety. I didn't have to see refugees in big numbers. I didn't have to see shelling. Those trips were taking place at daytime. Up until now, most of the shelling was taking place at night when the OSCE observation mission was not around anymore. So it was a different experience. One of my personal feelings and impressions from these last 12 days is that war suddenly feels very personal. War suddenly feels much more horrific from what I have felt it to be for the last 8 years. Probably it isn't the case for people who were actively fighting in this war and for the last 8 years, or for people who were traveling across the contact line as Red Cross employees, for instance, something like that, or humanitarian aid people. But for me, as a person who was not living there and who wasn't personally seeing with my own eyes the shelling, the bombing, the shooting, this now feels very different. It's quite a horrific scene. Most of you, I'm sure, have watched on TV the scenes of residential buildings being hit by rockets. You have probably seen explosions around the country. The nature of this attack by Russia is barbaric. The nature of this attack is horrific. Europe has probably seen nothing like it since 1945. The war in Yugoslavia was probably lacking the scale of this one. The war in Georgia was definitely lacking the scale and the duration, and even the nature of the shelling of Georgia was a little bit different. But there is definitely lines that we can draw, lines that lead to a better understanding of why this has happened. I have mentioned the war in Georgia because it was performed by this very same government of Vladimir Putin. Although technically he was, I think, the prime minister back in the time, but we all know that he was effectively the leader of the country as well. 2008, this was when it happened in August. And when Russia attacked Ukraine in 2014 and occupied Crimea, there's one very decent citation that I want to give to you. It's a citation of now former president of Estonia, Henrik Thomas Ilves. When Crimea occupation happened, what he said was that when Russia attacked Georgia in 2008, we as the collective West, if you want, or as international community, we hit the snooze button. We didn't want to wake up. We didn't want to face the reality. We didn't want to face the fact that there is a country that has a very different mentality, that has a very different understanding of what is international law, what is the security architecture of Europe. So the West did the minimum to discontinue that war, but the West did nothing to make sure there is no new page in this story. Well, the new page was turned in 2014, and again, unfortunately, we have to say that the West tried hard to press the snooze button again. I think what happens now, what has happened in the last 12 days, is what those snooze button have led to. Pressing the snooze button several times has led to a war that is very what's the word for that? Russia acts very honestly and openly. Russia has openly lied to the entire global community for months, saying that it doesn't plan any kind of attack, lying that Ukraine is planning some kind of offensive against Russia, lying that the troops and the equipment that Russia has stocked near Ukrainian border are there only for the teaching and the training and the drills. And Russia openly disrespected the entire communication that has led to this day by starting a war against Ukraine. Russia is also very open about its goals. It wants to destroy the country as such. It wants to transform the country into a quasi-state that would be completely controlled from Moscow. Russia is very open about wanting to destroy the security architecture of Europe. Russia is very open about disrespecting the international law. Russia is open about using horrific ways of fighting a war, shooting at residential districts.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Truly sorry to interrupt, but I just want to note we have, I just want to leave a little bit of time for questions, and we have two other speakers. So if we could just ask you to conclude.
Yes, I will do my best. I will do my best to wrap up in 2 minutes. If that's okay, please let me know. So this is a very special moment for the entire global community, because essentially the country that has been playing games for many years has now openly manifested its real intentions. And there is simply no way for the global community to press the snooze button again. I will finish my presentation, also hoping for a chance to say more in the Q&A session by briefly saying what many of you have already probably learned from the news, but the needs of the country right now. There is two ways the global community can help Ukraine immediately. First one has to do with humanitarian needs. From the description of what happens at the border, you can probably guess there is a dire need of support in terms of providing tents, heaters, portable generators of electricity, food stations, portable kitchens for millions of people who are trying to flee from the horrors of the war. Ukraine is quite busy fighting the war. Ukraine definitely needs help from abroad in terms of dealing with people who want to flee for safety. They have an absolute right to do so, and they should be supported. And there is still a need to improve the quality of services provided to them at the border, but also with evacuation from the war zone. Another big component of what kind of support you can provide is by informing people who you talk to. There is a big attempt to include some victim blaming rhetoric in discussing the war in Ukraine internationally. Some of it is unintentional. Some people are just trying to be even-sided and objective. But this war definitely isn't the case where you can talk about how Ukraine has provoked this war or how the West has provoked this war. This war is purely based on Russia's understanding of international relations, international law, and understanding that is very different, I would say opposite to that of the civilized world. So there is no place for saying that things are complicated and both sides have contributed to what has happened. Please be informed, please be talking to people about it. This way you can help a lot as well. I'll have more to say, but I hope that this is going to be possible during the Q&A. Thank you, and sorry for being too long.
Oh, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And we would love to hear more from you. But we want to also give the floor to our next speaker, Serhiy Petukhov, who's the former Deputy Minister of Justice of Ukraine, as our second speaker. So Serhiy, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, perfect. Okay, thank you so much.
Okay. Hi everyone, and I'm happy to address you and give you more information on what's going on here. I've been throughout these 12 days. I've been in Kiev. I live in the northwest suburb of the city, and I'm right across the sort of the small wood from the Hostomel airport, where the Russians try to put their paratroopers, and where in the vicinity of the main fightings that Russia was staging against Kiev. I could hear and see the battle going on. I could see our missiles being launched. So it's a very real experience. Although again, I'm not nowhere close to what other people in other parts of the country have been experiencing. It's an interesting experience of being in the middle of the war while you still have internet, electricity, and all the utilities, but at the same time you can be dead at any point of time. So this is very unusual to me. You would imagine war as being something different, but it can come at any point of time, and you can still have all the things that you're used to, but be it by missile. I guess I would want to, I now teach at the university, and I teach international law, so I would want to make several points and would rather be happy to answer your questions, because depending on what you're really interested in. Well, I think first of my points is that Putin is waging this war not against Ukraine as such, but rather as a way of asserting his vision of the world that goes back to the Soviet Union time. And he is trying to reestablish his sphere of influence and kind of buffer states again around Russia, as it used to be in the Cold War times. He clearly stated that in his document sent to Washington last year, where he wanted NATO to retreat to its pre-1997 borders in terms of military presence. So this war now is a part of a wider attack of Putin against the free world. My second point is that Putin grossly miscalculated many things. Well, firstly, he miscalculated the strength of the Ukrainian army and strength of Ukrainian people, because here the war is not only being fought by the regular army, it's fought by all of the people. We have people joining the army on this conscription. We have what we call territorial defense, people who are defending their neighborhoods, their villages, their towns, their cities. We have regular civilians who are helping army and refugees to the best they can. We have people who, when seeing Russians entering their cities on tanks, going out on the street and blocking the roads physically with the, by collecting hundreds of people, blocking the roads and not letting Russians going in. We've seen parts of the country that are now occupied by Russians, where people are not afraid to go out on this main square and protest and assert that they are Ukrainians. So I think Putin first miscalculated the strength and unity of Ukrainians in defending their country. And secondly, of course, he miscalculated the reaction of the free world. He expected to have a blitzkrieg, a really quick campaign in Ukraine where the West would remain disunited and would not be able to agree on what to do. So this also failed. But my third point is that Putin is ready to raise the stakes. And he cannot afford to accept that he lost his war in Ukraine. So therefore, he's ready to raise the stakes, which can be further shelling of the civilians and Ukrainian cities. Just now, I mean, recently we had the report that he shelled a maternity hospital in Mariupol. So we have these awful pictures of pregnant women being taken out, some of them probably dead, as well as newborns. He will not stop at that. He will continue shelling the cities. He already did a threat of nuclear weapon. He is able to bring more troops from Russia. He is able to create tensions in other parts of the world. So Putin is always ready to raise the stakes. My next point is that, well, there is no coming back to pre-February 24. The world has changed significantly in many respects. I think we are entering a new era of instability in the world that will lead to a new paradigm of security, of the global security. We've seen many countries reconsidering their own defense strategies. We've seen, for example, Germany changing their policy of a partnership with Russia and investing heavily in their own armed forces. We've seen Sweden reversing their kind of a neutrality policies in supporting Ukraine and sending anti-tank missiles in great number. We've seen world watching this conflict as it unfolds because it will have repercussions in every part of the world. My next point is, of course, watch out for China. China has been supporting Russia. And of course, they are also looking at what's going to happen with this aggression against Ukraine with respect to Taiwan. So Taiwan is also watching quite closely what's going on. So China is the main beneficiary to me right now of this instability. They pretty much have Russia in their pocket. They're the only one that can support Russia right now with money, buying their oil and gas, and transferring them technology, replacing the things that are under sanctions. So watch out for China. They will benefit from that. They will be watching the world reaction on the aggression against Ukraine and try to reap the benefits from it. And I guess my last point is that, well, we've done a lot. We've seen a united response from all our allies, from all of the free world, but that is not enough. That is not enough. This aggression will not stop at any point, quickly, without further investment of time, efforts, and cooperation. Putin is able to raise his stakes. He can continue for a while now. The sanctions are already biting on Russian economy, leading to the default, but that will not stop him today, tomorrow, or next week. He still has some time, and he repeatedly did things that kind of out of the box, that are not logical, would not fit into a normal thinking of a democratic country, of a democratic leader of a democratic country. So let's be prepared and vigilant to what's coming next. There's something else that he might come up with. He's not going to stop from committing a genocide of war crimes. He's not afraid of international justice. He is not limited by domestic opposition. Don't count on Russian people opposing Putin. I don't see this happening anytime soon. I think that we all will have to react on what's gonna come next, and there can be many things. So we have to remain vigilant. I will stop at that, but we'll be happy to answer your questions or participate in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sergey, and we really appreciate you joining us. Okay, last but not least of our three speakers, we also are happy to have with us Tamila, Tasheva, Deputy Permanent Representative of the President Ukraine in Crimea. Tamila, thank you so much for joining us.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. My name is Tamila Tasheva. I was born in the city of Samarkand, and when I was 6 years old, I moved to permanent residence with my family to the Crimea from the place of forcible deportation of Crimean Tatars, which happened in spring of 1944 by Soviet regime. In the late 1980s, thousands of Crimean Tatars also turned to their homeland. In 2014, the Crimea was occupied by Russia, and thousands of people were prosecuted by the Russian occupation authorities. Hundreds of people could not go to their motherland. So I myself, already 8 years, have not been at my home in Crimea. On February 24, Russia deprived me of my second home, Kiev. Now I am in Lviv, where hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians have come for temporary housing. I came to Lviv for work issue. On February 23-24, we organized the Days of Crimea in Lviv, dedicated to the Day of Crimea Resistance. But I did not get to Kiev. My cat, which was waiting for me at home, was taken away to Lviv 5 days after the beginning of the war. From the first day, we have been actively working in the office of the President of Ukraine in Autonomous Republic of Crimea. We began active work to inform the population about the Crimea in the context of the war, monitor Russian narratives that are spreading in the Crimea and form counter-narratives. We work with the issue of documenting war crimes, human rights violations, together with the Ministry of Justice, the Office of the President, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and NGOs. We also document the issue of illegal conscription into the Russian army and the participation of Crimean people in the so-called special operation. We make instruction for people how to avoid conscription and participation in hostilities in Ukraine. We work and help international journalists working in Lviv. Of course, we work with the appeals of our citizens. Our citizens send us a lot of information. We try to quickly verify it and inform about it. And of course, we help with emergency questions about leaving the cities Kyiv, Kherson, Sumy, and Kharkiv. We engage in communication and coordination on humanitarian aid. We join where it can be useful, like all Ukrainians now. Crimea, like Russia, is now actively trying to isolate itself in terms of information, continuous active propaganda, and information hybrid war in Crimea. Many fakes are spreading there, including the narrative of Putin's active support in Crimea and his special operation. Of course, it's not true. People in Crimea are already afraid for the safety of their loved ones who may be sent to fight against Ukraine. There are already a huge hospital in city of Jankoy and Simferopol, and it's very difficult to hide it. People see it. In addition to the wounded, according to our information, many dead people are being transported from mainland of Ukraine to Crimea Peninsula. Russia persecutes activists who spoke against the war with Ukraine, again accusing them of provocation against the occupying authorities of Ukraine. In Crimea, lack of food and store shelves are empty. Russia gives many ultimatums to Ukraine. We have already answered that Ukraine does not accept any ultimatums, including Crimea and Donbass. Now there is full-scale bloody war. Many civilians died, and we will never forgive it for Russia. Russia's top political leadership will pay for all the war crimes committed in Ukraine. Ukraine is actively working in the field of legal warfare. We are actively working with the International Criminal Court, the International Court of Justice, under the Genocide Convention, with European Human Rights Court, and using other international mechanisms. We feel great support from our partners, above all of great support from people around the world. We see admiration for the fighting spirit of our army, our top leadership, and our citizens who are resisting and taking to the streets against the occupying tanks. When our partners, our diaspora, other people around the world asked what can be helped, I can answer. Of course, in addition to funds, humanitarian aid, medical care, this is a continuation of pressure on the governments of your countries to close the sky and no-fly zone for Ukraine. It's also important to remind the governments of your countries when you take the streets of your cities what is important. To carry out the complete isolation of Russia, to expel Russia ambassadors and representatives from international organizations, to boycott and ban cultural and sporting events for Russia. We need fighter jets. We need air and missile defense. We need to protect our sky. We demand the disconnection of Russia Sberbank from SWIFT system. We demand the countries stop buying Russian oil. We demand that Russian ships be banned from entering world ports. And last thing, what I must say, we really fighting not only for Ukraine, we are fighting for the wild world, for a peaceful sky around the world, for the values of democracy, freedom of speech, values of human rights, for good against evil, for light, for darkness. Help us in our common struggle. Glory to Ukraine, glory to heroes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tamila, for sharing your perspective and those words. Okay, so thank you to all three speakers again for being with us, and to everybody that's joining us over Zoom and in the room here. We have some time for questions now. Maybe if anybody in the room wants to start with a question, we can start that way, and then see if we receive some questions over Zoom. I'm sure a lot of people have things they would like to ask about.
We understand that Russia is blackmailing the world with the nuclear button, but our people now is dying, and we understand we are on front line. We front line for wild world, for world of democracy. We understand that it's evil, Putin, it's not stop on our country, and all world must understand it, of course. But it's only one way for not no-fly zone, for stop bombing our country, our citizens, and dies of our people.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. If I may, I want to just ask a question for the speakers. We are following a lot of the news here on the Western side, and I just want to note there's tremendous amount of support, at least in the US, across the political spectrum for Ukraine. So I think it's a very positive development that anti-Putinism has become a worldwide phenomenon, and even across Democrats and Republicans in the US, there's a lot of support for Ukraine. But I wanted to know if there's anything that the three of you thought has been missing from what you can see from the Western coverage, or if there's anything you think American or the audiences joining us over Zoom, like, is there anything in particular that you think people will need to know about that has been missing from the discussion so far? So anyone, Roman or Serhiy or Tamila, feel free to reply.
I can go first if that's fine. I want to pick on the point that Tamila has done in her initial remark. She mentioned about the demands.
Sure, yeah. Oh, what happened?
I think it's connection.
I'm going to put his,
That Russia what is in the discussion. Sorry, can you still hear me? I'm sorry.
could you start again? I'm sorry, we just missed the first part.
Yes, sorry. The demands by Russia that you have been hearing about from news, mostly voiced by President Putin. This is a very interesting point because if you look closer from one press conference to the other press conference, the wording that he is using is not the same. It looks like every day he looks at the situation in Ukraine and he understands that he miscalculated what he has planned for. And it looks like his demands are kind of becoming less ambitious. But here is the important point that I would like to stress here, and I would like you as the audience to understand as well. I think he's very clear about one message. Whatever wording he's using, what he really wants to say is that I want to be able to do it again. He wants to finish this war in a certain manner that will allow him to do it again in 3 years from now, 5 years from now, it doesn't matter. What really matters is that, first of all, he wants to be not brought to accountability for what he did this time. He wants to be able to, again, after some time, to be traveling to Geneva or New York or other capitals to hold negotiations, to be having meetings with people, to maybe have a speech at UN. He doesn't want to be wanted by tribunals and international courts. So that's one thing he's worried about. The other thing is that he wants to make sure that after this war is over, Ukraine does not become a member of EU and NATO, and thus he can attack again, because again, there will be no legal obligations for anyone to step in and defend us. So you may hear new words from him. You may hear new versions of his demands in the coming days, especially if Russian army continues to be having troubles to progress with the attack. But you have to be aware that his main goal is to make sure that whatever is the end of this, he can do it again in the future. And don't have any doubts, he will try to do it again with Ukraine and with other countries that he is able to attack like this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Roman. Serhii, is there anything you want to share with us that you think is missing from the debate so far?
I think that, firstly, I think that we've had a bipartisan support of Ukraine in the US since 2014, and it was important for us to keep it. Ukraine has been in the headlines of the US during election time, which was a bit unfortunate to us. Now I've seen, Republicans and Democrats competing as to who is going to be harsher on Putin, who's going to be more supportive of Ukraine. So I think this is very welcome, and we indeed see a full support both in the political discussion in the US and among people and understanding of the challenges that we're facing. I'm not that familiar on the extent of discussion. I mostly follow the discussion in the European media, I would say. In Europe, the situation is much more complicated. Europe is much more divided. By definition, it's also much more dependent on Russia and has more historical, cultural, economical ties. So to me, of course, this is the most important place to do the communication and advocacy. I think that I haven't seen really the wider discussion as to what this whole situation means to the new security situation in the world, right? You do not expect a United Nations Security Council member to blatantly violate United Nations Charter. I mean, nobody's perfect, right? We've seen US doing some questionable things and doing wrong things, justifying something in the United Nations that turned out to be wrong later on. But we've never seen a blatant outright violation of the United Nations Charter without any reasonable explanation, with only just a lie. So I think what I'm missing is what's the new world we're living in? What's going to happen with the whole security paradigm that we have? Do we still going to keep the Security Council as it is? Is it functioning? And what's going to happen if Russia succeeds? What message it will send to other dictators around the world? What other aggressions can we expect in other parts of the world? So I haven't seen this discussion because, again, it tends to concentrate on Ukraine that much, a lot of discussion, whereas even here, I mean, I'm sitting in the middle of the armed conflict. I'm thinking about the wider picture and the wider perspective. What would that mean to the whole of the world? So I think that's something that has been missing, and that is important to think about right now.
Okay, thank you so much. Actually, we have another question from the audience here. Murat, do you want to just put up
Here.
like?
Yeah. Hi, my name is Murat Ilyasov. I'm here visiting scholar at Wisconsin Madison University. Thank you very much for sharing with us your insights about what's going on there. It's very valuable to know. What I wonder is there any statistics that are more or less reliable, or maybe estimates on how many people are already have died, how many victims are from civilian and military side? I've seen some statistic about military casualties, but they all seem like propaganda rather than actual stats. So if you have anything to share with us about this matter, it would be great. Thank you.
Well, if I can jump in, I don't have any insider information. I'm relying on different sources of official information. So the numbers that we have is we have official Ukrainian numbers of the Russian casualties, and it's estimated at 12,000 soldiers as of now. And there's an estimate of civilian casualties on Ukrainian side. I might be mistaken, but I think it's around 500 something. It's also confirmed more or less by the United Nations estimates. We have a human rights monitoring mission in Ukraine since 2014. But definitely the numbers are volatile, they're unreliable. I think they are, with respect to civilian casualties, they are conservative because we don't have access to some parts of our territory. The Russian only gave, the only number they gave was several days ago, they gave the number of casualties of Russian soldiers at around 500, which is definitely much lower than could possibly be. So I think overall, it's hard to tell as in every armed conflict, but the overall number of casualties has probably been rising over 20,000 already, taking into account both military casualties on the Ukrainian and Russian side and civil casualties in Ukraine. Thank you for this question. So every professor in international law is well trained to answer these questions. We get them all the time. Is international law at all? Is it working? Is it any, does it have any enforcement behind it? It's a complicated question, and definitely, I mean, the international law as we know it today was not meant to work against the United Nations Security Council permanent member, because ultimately the only enforcement power that we have globally is the Security Council. So of course, given the Russian position in the United Nations and globally, many sanctions or many restraints of international law have been ineffective, especially that given that Russia chose to disregard both international law as such and international courts and proceedings. They've changed their constitution to expressly state they're not gonna enforce the European Court of Human Rights decisions if they're run counter to their constitution. They did not appear in the International Court of Justice to respond to Ukrainian claim brought last week. So in this respect, of course, it's more complicated, but there has been proceedings that were effective. So arbitration, the private arbitration, is much more effective because it can be enforced in other countries. And as always, if you have property abroad, it can be enforced against this property as long as it does not enjoy the state immunity. And we've seen this happening, and Russia had troubles even before that. Since the Yukos time, they had a huge team of lawyers protecting Russian assets around the world for arrests, court proceedings, and confiscation. So private arbitration, investment arbitration has been effective. Secondly, you can have sanctions that are enforceable through specific international organization that run certain industries or run certain spheres or areas. My example would be, International Council of Civil Aviation. There, the sanction can be effective because no one wants to be excluded from the civil aviation. Or World Trade Organization can be effective because no one wants to get trade sanctions. So we've seen some of the proceedings that we've instituted having certain effect on Russia, while others being non-effective. In terms of the actual armed conflict, I can state quite openly, no legal recourse will stop Russia. So this is not going to stop Russia from committing war crimes that they are committing right now. This is, though, important for years to come. At some point of time, we will bring Russians to accountability. So we need to collect evidence. We need to present that. We need to bring this to an international or national court to have a final court ruling on the perpetrators, because what we've seen, if this does not happen later on, even if there's another government, there's another president, there will be people who would say this never happened. This was not our fault. This is all fake information. So this is a long-term important thing to do. So lawyers work their way. International justice is not quick. International justice takes time, but it makes decisions that are and makes pronouncements that are final, trusted, and relied upon. So I think this is a separate track that needs to be followed. Right now, political steps are much more important and effective because they have immediate effect and they have ability to stop, civilian death, unnecessary destruction, and war crimes.
Okay, thank you so much. I think we are going to shift to a second part of the program here, which is a more concrete discussion about what are ways concretely for all of us in the room here or people zooming in to help Ukraine, a kind of brainstorming session and presentation of some resources here. So I think our speakers from Ukraine are absolutely invited to join us, but we also realize it's late at night there, and so we understand if you're not able to. But I think I want to turn the floor over to Yevgenia, right? Okay. Sorry, it's a little bit just-in-time production here in terms of organization. So we want to turn the floor over to Yevgenia Mitrokhina to discuss some resources here. And then we wanted to just have a conversation with people either in the room or online in terms of just ideas for what we can do besides just, crying and watching the news. What else we can do concretely? Okay, so Yevgenia, please. Okay.
Good, is that good? So yeah, once again, thank you for everyone for coming here and for speakers to kind of talking about your experiences. And we also try to think how we can help Ukraine right now. And we prepared a couple of slides, and maybe if you have some ideas, you can also, also welcome to share. So firstly, we want to start with something that you can do here in Wisconsin, and you can no. So yeah, you can actually, I think that's it. Okay, control watch. Okay, I don't understand what's going on.
You have to do there. I'm sorry.
Okay, so yeah, as you can see on the slide, you can participate in different. Actually, I think we can share the presentation with you, and you can have access to this all QR codes and get more information. So yeah, the destination that's actually about medical supplies, food, and whatever that can be helpful, humanitarian things that can be helpful for people there right now. So it's you see, it started at March 7th till 11th. So we still have time to help. We also, yeah, we can also try to get some information about like what local business here does, and you can
There's no slides online.
okay, so you can also find, well, yeah, like now anyway, we're talking about medicine, so we can try to figure out.
Okay.
Okay. This one.
Okay.
It's all good.
Good?
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, like here in Wisconsin, you can also like, even for your, I don't know, everyday stuff like coffee and bakery, you can go somewhere where people would donate some share of money and like also help to buy some stuff that would be needed right now in Ukraine. Yeah, I think this one, we also like, maybe you've already joined some protests and you can join Facebook groups that make announcements and kind of still kind of like, I don't remember who, but one of our speakers mentioned that information is also important and telling other people about what's going on. So we thought that can be like another option. And we also collected some like other resources that actually like different international organizations like Red Cross that apparently are more prepared to help people and they know the ways how to do that. So yeah, as I mentioned, we can share the slides and you would have access to all these links. Yeah, and apparently there are already lots of information on the internet. This one is kind of aggregates lots of stuff, and you can find useful information here, and we hope that it will be helpful for those people who are experiencing all these troubles right now. So thank you.
So does anyone want to come share something or anything that they're, so Yoshiko will share one of her ideas.
Hi. So I just again want to thank Marika, Eugenia, and Valeria for organizing this event. And I hope we can continue to be in touch with our colleagues in Ukraine to continue this discussion. The thing I wanted to share is that in my opinion, this is an incredibly important moment in international affairs, as well as obviously an important moment for Ukraine and for Russia. And I think the media attention, and not just media, but the general interest of the world in the conflict is really important in terms of what we can do to try to bring a peaceful and just end. So in addition to the concrete suggestion already brought up by Eugenia of donating money, which I think is actually really important in this case, of sending resources now to any of the organizations that are working to help both refugees as internally displaced people and the war effort, as well as other humanitarian assistance. I actually think giving money is really a critical thing that people can do. But the other thing I think is in terms of keeping up attention, we're in an academic setting. And I just would encourage everyone, if you have an opportunity, if somebody asks you to speak about this, to say yes to that, to discuss things with in formal settings or informally with friends or neighbors, but talk about it in your classes to explain to people the importance of what's happening. I can say for myself, I'm giving a talk at a library tomorrow, another one on Monday. And I just think it's important for every academic to say, okay, this is our job to discuss issues. And each of us has some expertise that we can discuss, even if it's not 100% on Ukrainian politics per se. There's different aspects of the human rights aspect, sanctions, military. There's many, many aspects of this conflict that I think people can connect with. And the other thing is, this is an opportunity for people in the U.S. to engage with your Congressperson Mark Pocan here in Madison, Senators Tammy Baldwin and Ron Johnson, and the governor, to let him know your views. Because, for example, right now there's a discussion about how much Americans are willing to pay in increased energy prices for this cutting off of Russian oil to the U.S. And there's a lot of polls going on right now where people are saying, across Democrats and Republicans, people are willing to pay to punish Putin. And I think that kind of thing is important to even to say to a senator, like, yeah, I'm in support of that. It's not just a grand initiative. What are you willing to sacrifice? How much do you care about this? How much do you want the government to work together to do something to help Ukraine? I just think it's very small cost to send an email to any of our elected representatives, but I also think just continuing to talk about this event is important to the social basis of the support for Ukraine in the US.
Thank you so much, Yoi. So I have one other suggestion to add. So I myself am a member of the Ukrainian diaspora, and there are a lot of Ukrainian diaspora organizations throughout the United States and even here in Wisconsin. So one thing that actually Valeria even did was emailing Plus Ukrainian Scouting Organization and asking them if, is there any donations going on? Are there any donation drives? They're up in Chicago. That's the closest location for them. But again, you can kind of look for perhaps local worship spaces or places where Ukrainians congregate, Ukrainian Facebook groups, and reach out because the Ukrainian diaspora community, I think, would really, really appreciate sort of us as Madison residents reaching out to them and offering our support. So it's just one other idea. Anyone else want to share something or perhaps an action item that they have participated in already that they would like to share? All right, so Valeria is going to come here.
I think I just would like to stress that there are local businesses that do collect money to support Ukrainian refugees and Ukraine in general. And just keep an eye on that. Keep an eye on supporting those businesses. We gave a couple of examples and you can find them on the slides. Just choose places where people decide to not only care for the community here, but care about the community more globally, and make more cautious and responsible choices in what you purchase and how you purchase that.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Valeria. Does anyone online have anything to share in terms of resources? Feel free to write them in the chat, or we can try to unmute you if there's anyone there that would like to share. All right. Oh, okay. Let's see.
We can just read it out. Jennifer Tischler added that from what she has heard, financial donations are most impactful. And I just want to note that that's my sense as well of things that this is the time to support organizations on the ground that are helping. We get a lot of requests for financial support of politics in the US, of campaigns. And I guess I just want to say, rather than funding campaigns, you don't really know where the money is going. A lot of it goes to advertising, etc. Like this is an important time if you want to get involved in politics with money to support those organizations helping people on the ground. So I just really want to press that